All right, I am live. Good day, everyone. Monday afternoon. I am Rob Tatro from robtatro.com, Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management, portfolio manager here at Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management and the Tatro Wealth Advisory Group. Brings me a lot of joy to be here today. I love these. Today, we got a really neat guest. Super excited to bring you our guest. Before we get to the guest, though, I'm going to queue up. Let's get right to it. I'm going to queue up a quick video for you guys. That is our disclaimer. As a reminder, everything you see here today, do not take this as investment advice. We don't know your situation. If you're a client of mine and you want investment advice, reach out to me. We could book a time. If you're not a client and you want to become a client, again, reach out. Go to www.speaktorob.com. And if you're not a client and you're not a prospect, then do not act on anything that we're going to talk about today. We are talking markets. We're talking, all sorts of different stuff today. Let me introduce the guest, the man of the hour, Michael Hainsworth. Michael.
Rob.
All right, great. I'm fantastic. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
You're live in Toronto right now. Yeah, really excited. So Michael Hainsworth, for those of you who don't know, Michael spent I feel like the better part of your business career on BNN.
Yep.
I saw you every single day. You also hosted you were the only business reporter that I remember on CTV News.
Yep.
You would have spoke to, I don't know, millions of people every single day. You're doing a whole bunch of other stuff right now. But Michael, we're extremely we're pumped to have you here on our show, on the Tatro Show. So thanks for joining.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
First of all, let's talk a bit of the headlines here. I have a screen open with the headlines. I'm watching the close here on the Dow. It looks like the Dow rallied towards the end of the day here. We finished the venture exchange actually finished up a little bit. The Dow finished down about 300 or so. TSX was down a little bit. If we look at the big news today, for sure, the market rallied last week a ton. So maybe I could start there recapping that. So the Canadian index rallied about 8% last week, the TSX. The Dow, NASDAQ, the S&P were all kind of between 10 and 12. Your quick thoughts on that? Maybe I should ask you first, do you still follow the market as much as you used to?
Nowhere near as much as I used to. And you wouldn't believe how much that's helped my mental health. The work I did on BNN every day was by and large play-by-play on the markets, just like any play-by-play or color commentator type guy you would get in any sporting event. But the vast majority of Canadians don't make investment decisions on a minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour, or day-by-day basis, let alone week. The type of work I did on BNN required me to be dialed in on a moment-by-moment basis. But I have to tell you right now, if I had to come out of a Donald Trump press release conference and recap what he had to say, and then try to make sense of what it meant, I would probably not be in a very healthy place right now. As a matter of fact, I've got former colleagues who I know who have told me that who work in the States primarily. So the U.S. cable television news world is a little bit different, but they go home and they turn off the lights and sit in a corner and rock every night. I am so glad I don't have to deal with that on a day-to-day basis. But of course, yes, absolutely. I'm on top of the markets on a regular basis, not on a moment-by-moment basis. If you had asked me how far the Dow had fallen today, I couldn't have told you it was 325 points. But I could have told you that it was quite remarkable that OPEC has managed to hammer out a relationship with Russia that may ultimately help Canada.
I feel like if that story would have come out in a non-COVID time, let's say you're on, it's 2017 or 2016, and they announce a 10%, an agreement to cut by 10%, I think oil would have gone up like 20% or something. We've never seen anything like that.
I had never expected to see crude oil trading at the prices it's trading at right now. Forget West Texas Intermediate. The one that I care about is WCS, because that's the one that affects us. And the fact that it costs that much more to get our oil to market, therefore makes it that much less valuable to the world, is one of the biggest issues that we as Canadians, from an economic perspective, need to address.
Yeah, what's the solution there?
Pipelines largely. The problem that the prime minister has, of course, is that he has positioned himself as an environmental prime minister. And you can't square the circle by pumping more crude oil onto the world market while simultaneously claiming to be in the environmental camp. So there are things that have to be done along the way between now and the point at which we wean ourselves off crude oil. The unfortunate thing is we don't seem to be getting a sense from Alberta and Saskatchewan that there's an interest in weaning itself off a commodity that's not only damaging to the planet, but in decline in demand.
What about the other headlines today? I'm taking a look at some of them here. Aurora Cannabis is doing a 12-for-1 share consolidation. I don't know if you saw that news. That was a stock that I guess would have been after you left, I think, or maybe it would have been right around the time you left BNN.
I know. I remember Aurora Cannabis.
12-for-1 reverse.
That is never a good sign when a company has to do a reverse stock split. I'm really concerned about, well, not concerned. We need to separate the wheat from the chaff. There's no two ways about that. And we're finding, as the tide goes out, who's wearing swim trunks and who isn't. And at this point,
for the viewers who don't know what a split is, when a company, $100 company makes 2 shares of $50. A reverse split is the opposite. You got a $1 share right now. Aurora's trading at $1. They're doing a 12-for-1, so they need to comply with the U.S. Stock exchange regulations. They can't be below X amount. So now every 12 shares that you have will become 1, and it's going to be a $12 share. As you said, Michael, generally not a good sign for stocks short term.
Almost every single stock that has done
I want to talk about
itself lower a year later than where it was prior to the split.
That's my recollection of reverse splits as well. Real quick about earnings. Do you have any kind of forecast of what we'll see in earnings? And then I want to talk a bit about you leaving BNN.
How could anyone have any forecast on earnings at this point, with global economies shut down to the degree that they are, and no true understanding as to when this will be behind us? Donald Trump said Easter. Easter came and went. We knew damn well the moment he said Easter that was never going to be a thing. And the bigger concern I've got is sort of the rebound effect, where we all have decided that, yes, it's now time to get back out into the world, and we have that second wave. And that second wave spooks people more so than the first wave, and that's what triggers the depression. So we have to take a very slow and steady approach to this. And I think between now and the point at which we get a sense of the all clear, because I don't think there's going to be, a big siren wail that says it's all good, it's time to come out now, like some sort of nuclear bunker type scenario. We're slowly going to work our way back into this economy, and until even that begins, how can we even get a sense as to what earnings are truly going to be like?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's impossible to measure. On last week, we had a couple guests who talked specifically about earnings. But by the way, guys, this is a very special guest today, Michael Hainsworth. Go on Facebook, go on YouTube, wherever you're watching this. Feel free to post some questions. If we have time, I'll definitely ask them to Mike. I'm going to ask you my first question. Why'd you leave BNN? What's the story there? What happened? You had it all. You were the celebrity. You were the face of business in Canada.
Celebrity. I was.
You were the guy.
TV famous. That's what I was. I was a relative who's that of Canadian broadcasting. The reason why I left was 2018 marked my 30th year in broadcasting, and in broadcasting, 30 years is a milestone. But it's not a milestone. Getting a pink slip at 31 years, at 34 years, at 35 years. It was inevitable at some point that was going to happen. And
you thought you were going to get fired?
No, not fired. Broadcasting is in a race to the bottom. It's going down the drain. The revenue model broke a long time ago, and the industry isn't fixing it. The problem that broadcasting has is that it's run by broadcasters. Broadcasters make terrible managers. Problem is MBAs make terrible broadcasters. So we're in a weird kind of catch-22 situation with the industry. Mobile first was something that broadcasters had been talking about 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And I had been banging my head against the wall saying, we need to stop making television for 42-inch screens and start making television for 4.2-inch screens. And I never really got a sense that the industry, at least not the people I was working with, truly appreciated and understood that. So because we were in a race to the bottom, And if once an accountant sorts a spreadsheet a certain way, they're going to go, that guy, he's out, because we can replace him with 4, other people, type of thing. So I figured it was at some point going to happen that I would get a pink slip, a rationalization. And so I thought, if I get out on my own terms, then I will reinvent myself on my own terms and reinvent myself for a digital age. And that's what I've been trying to do over the course of literally the last 2 years this month.
Tell me about that. Tell me about the reinvention of Michael Hainsworth.
Well, what I recognized was that the corporate world didn't need the mainstream media to get its message out anymore. You are a prime example of this. There was a time when none of this was possible, and that there was no way you would have been able to flip a switch and talk to your clients directly in this kind of fashion. Well, of course you can do that now. And everybody has that opportunity to do that to one degree or another. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to continue to tell really interesting stories. And for more than 7 minutes at a time. When you and I spoke on BNN, first of all, you were remote. So I didn't really get a chance to chat with you in the commercial break as we would if we were face to face. And then we were on TV for 7 straight minutes, and then we'd hit a commercial break or move on to another element, and you'd be gone. And I get you at 7 minutes at a time. Whereas now, for example, I've launched a documentary series for CIBC Innovation Banking that is all about entrepreneurs. And I get to spend all day with these really brilliant people and find out what makes them tick, and then take all of that and turn it into an interesting piece of content that not only is interesting for the client, because of course clients have check marks, KPIs that they need to check mark off as they go down their list, but very importantly, to the consumer. So the content that I'm creating today for the corporate world is not intended to be a commercial. It's intended to be an educational vehicle that recognizes, specifically with the CIBC example, that at some point entrepreneurs are going to need people like CIBC. And if we can show CIBC's thought leadership and how they're promoting people, then maybe those people will pick up the phone and call that bank at that time. Similarly, when I first left, the first documentary series I launched was Futurhythmic, which is a portmanteau of future and algorithm, because I firmly believe the future is algorithmic. And what we did was we went around the world and talked to really smart people, and we found out what was going on in their heads. And our benevolent benefactor was Nokia, because that was a client that recognized that people cut a $5 billion check for next generation wireless with people who are thought leaders. And so if we can showcase thought leadership, people are going to pick up the phone and call them instead. So I get to talk to really interesting people about really interesting topics in ways that I could never have done so 7 minutes at a time on cable news.
Yeah, it's very fixed in how it's done. And I remember the first time I don't know if you remember this, but I was the Valiant guy. I was the guy who called, to get out of Valiant early. You guys brought me on remotely on the studio here by the MTS Center at just by Portage in Maine. I went in there. It was a black screen. I couldn't see anything. I could just hear you guys. Didn't even know where you guys were. I had X many minutes. And I said, where there's smoke, there's fire. I'd get out of Valiant right now. And I kept saying it. You guys kept bringing me on week after week after week. And I became that guy. And then eventually I parlayed that into a live studio appearance with you. And I'll never forget this story. I was there, and I made this whole pitch about how I believe that consumer discretionaries were undervalued. Okay, because spending or whatever, and I kind of build up to that, but I kept saying consumer staples, and then you corrected me. You called me out. You're like, Rob, consumer staples or consumer discretionaries? And I was like, I was panicking. I was so nervous. It was my first time on BNN, and I just that's me screwing up remarkably. But now, if I screw up right now, who cares, right? We can just we could just edit it out. No, we can't. But your point about algorithms,
yes.
So I was just going to say this, you sound like my brother. This is my brother, Charlie. He's like so diehard data.
Yes.
Everything's got to be like, he's got a an actuarial background, and he's a data guy, and like everything has to be data algorithm based. So let's talk about Futurithmic. So tell me about it. Tell me a bit more about it, and what are the goals short term and kind of in the near future?
Well, Facebook really gave us some tremendous insight back with the Cambridge Analytica fiasco. And we use that as the jumping off point for essentially trying to figure out what would this series be about? How would we build a series around the idea that we have a bunch of emerging technologies? And 10 years ago, well, 2007, when Facebook first opened its doors, everybody was thrilled. It took a decade for us to realize what the double-edged sword of social media truly feels like. And Cambridge Analytica proved that. So what we wanted to do was launch a series that looked at nascent technologies, what they're all about, that they're coming, and what we can do to ensure that they're used for good and not for evil. One of my favorite episodes of Futurithmic was we went to London, England, and spent the day with Wikipedia founder Jimmy Wales. And we talked about the future of truth in the age of alternative facts. And the idea that his Wikipedia and the next thing he's working on, which is basically a news version of Wikipedia, is sort of that way of ensuring that we beat back Kellyanne Conway and Donald Trump and all those other types when they flat out lie. He told me a great story about when he first launched Wikipedia. He would go to bed at night scared to death that while he was asleep, trolls would be desecrating the website. And he'd wake up the next morning and the site was fine. But the reason why the site was fine was not because trolls were not desecrating Wikipedia overnight, because anybody can edit any article on Wikipedia. What gave him the confidence that we can beat back alternative facts is that when he did wake up, the anti-trolls were also up overnight in Australia and everywhere else around the world. And
they'd already corrected.
Right. And so that is what gave him the ultimate confidence that we as a society have the ability to push back against these charlatans, really. And so that was one of my more favorite episodes. But
you see that obviously.
Brother, I went to MIT, talked with Sandy Pentland, who is like the godfather of artificial intelligence. And it was the most amazing and frightening experience of my career to learn about the power and the threat of artificial intelligence.
And machine learning, I would imagine.
Yep.
Okay, so what do you think of real quick on tech stocks? I just see now that Amazon basically closed at an all-time high or close to an all-time high. Do you think, I know, again, you don't follow it that close, but do you think that we're properly factoring in what you see as the future as all the tech companies kind of gaining a larger and larger portion of our lives?
I'm hesitant.
I think Amazon's a buy.
At an all-time high? Well, there's a couple of shoes still to drop, not the least of which is with, as we were talking about earlier, the potential for a second wave of coronavirus. But I think once the dust settles on coronavirus, we're going to start asking a lot of very serious questions about Amazon, and specifically about the way it treated its people and some of those types of issues. And depending on who ends up in the White House in November, we could very well see the Democrats come forward and say, listen, you very much abused your Amazon employees during Corona. And we need to make some changes to the way that works. And as you know, the stock market will hit a sell button and then have a sober second thought. Shoot first, ask questions later kind of thing. So once Corona is behind us and once the US presidential election is behind us, I'd feel a little more confident about making a call on Amazon than I would today. But I'm even more hesitant to make a call on the role of technology companies in our lives in the future, because we're of two minds under quarantine here about the value of technology and its role in where we are right now. I'm particularly interested in technologies that will help prevent the next coronavirus. And we sort of quasi touched on it a little bit. I think machine learning, artificial intelligence, and the telecom industry will play a very big role in that in the future.
Let me ask you about, let's go back to your days as a broadcaster. Tell me about your worst guest or your worst interview or your worst memory, or maybe it's your best memory, the biggest train wreck that you were involved in.
Well, I wouldn't say it was a train wreck. It was the weirdest guest I ever had, and also the most famous. I interviewed the Reverend Jesse Jackson. He happened to be in the building talking to one of the chat shows about something, and we had a really energetic segment producer, horrible human being, but a great segment producer, who managed to grab him and drag him into my studio. And it was literally a case of, do you want to talk to this guy? And I'm like, well, of course I want to talk to this guy. Well, what do you want to talk to him about? I don't know. Let's just get him in here. And we did. And when he came in, we were on the air. They had him in the wings. We hit the commercial break. He came on, sat down, and it was like he was in the off position. He wasn't chatty. I try to chat with the guests. Build a bit of a rapport, because I think that's valuable, regardless as to whether or not a conversation is going to be antagonistic. I think it's important to sort of establish a rapport with a guest in a commercial, and he was having none of it. So, you in Toronto for long? No. Oh, so just for the day? Yeah. But the moment the little red tally light on the microphone went on the camera went on, it was like somebody flipped a switch, and suddenly he was talking about important issues, and then soon as the microphone went off, it was like he was off again. And he was I'd never experienced that before.
Okay. Yeah, I always try to chit chat, because you kind of got to bring a rapport. We're going to talk about something, so let's get to know each other a little bit. Okay, so Futuristic, obviously you've got some energy put into there. I listen to Beats and Geeks. So for those of you who don't know, Beats and Geeks, the podcast that we're hosting right now, that you're hosting right now with none other than Alan Cross. Alan Cross is, as we know, Manitoban, from Stonewall, Manitoba. So pretty thrilled to have a connection there to Manitoba. And he's a legend in the radio broadcasting industry, in the music industry. Tell me about Beats and Geeks.
The weird thing about how I developed my relationship with Alan Cross has to do with advice that you get when you get into the career, you're into the industry at the beginning of your career. Anybody who wants to get into radio, television for that matter too, the best advice you can receive is find someone in the industry whose delivery, whose read you like, and then mimic it, literally. So if you're in the car and they're on the radio, turn on the radio and literally speak out loud exactly what they're saying, exactly the same way they're saying it. And until you figure out how they're doing what they're doing, you're going to learn about things like breathing. You're going to learn about pacing. You're going to learn about writing. And then once you've figured all of that out, you then make it your own. And so while if you listen to Alan Cross and you listen to me, our deliveries are remarkably different. Hello from Montreal, by the way. However, one thing that is consistent between Alan's delivery and my delivery is that when Alan is reading something he's written, it just sounds like he's talking to you. And so when I was in radio school, I had actually been in radio for 2 years already by the time I had been going to radio school. I'd gotten into radio at 17. I worked overnights, midnight to 5:30 a.m., and then would take the subway into school, crash in the cafeteria until 8:40 a.m., and then go to class. And then when I got into college for radio, I would listen to Alan, and that was the guy whose read I modeled myself after. My wife, I met at 680 News, the all-news radio station in Toronto. We used to play footsie under the console while we were dating. And
I like how you leaned in to tell that part.
oh
You
yeah,
just
just
leaned
between
in.
you and me. And so she and I dated, and she did a similar sort of thing with a woman named Mary Ellen Benninger. If you listen to Mary Ellen Benninger and Ann Deuce, they sound very similar, because Ann modeled her read after Mary Ellen. Fast forward a few years, Ann's sitting in the 680 newsroom, empty seat beside her, because of course somebody got a freaking pink slip. And Mary Ellen comes in, sits down, introduces herself. She says, "I modeled my read after you. And my husband modeled his read after a guy named Alan Cross." And Mary Ellen says, "Alan Cross is my husband." So next thing you know, they're over to the house. We're having dinners. We're going up to the Danforth, big popular street in Toronto. One night over an Italian, Alan out of nowhere says, we should do a podcast together. And when the guy who was your radio mentor and idol says, we should do something together, well, of course you do it. And 7 seasons later, we're still going strong.
7 seasons. You guys get a ton of viewers on that show, or a ton of podcast listeners. He is from Stonewall, Manitoba. What's maybe the favorite episode you've done? Or if I'm at home and I've not heard of this, what episode should I go? What podcast should I go listen to? Or which one's your favorite?
We do this thing from time to time where we break down a song, and we have a series of guests who are longtime friends of the show, and we have a producer, a record producer we bring on from time to time, and we deconstruct a track. And I think if there could only be one, it would be the Don't Stop Believin' episode from Journey. We broke down that song on a bunch of different bases, metrics, and it's a fascinating look into how you build one of the most popular songs of our time.
Yeah, I've karaoke'd it a few times in my life.
You're a braver man than me.
Yeah, it's not pretty. It's not pretty. Okay, so that's a good one for sure. What is it like to work with him? And how you guys record? How often, or how do you do it? How often? And
right. So I am the co-host and the technical producer of the show. You got Mox there in the background pushing buttons for you right now. So you're the Alan Cross in this situation. Alan's job is to show up once a week with a few story ideas, and we talk. And Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern time, we spend about 30, 45 minutes recording an episode. And then I spend about 3 hours editing the show, not because of screw ups or anything like that, but Alan will make a reference to something. And I'm like, oh, well, we have to find that clip now. And next thing you know, I'm spending 20 minutes on YouTube trying to find the absolute perfect clip that matches with that line that he said. In broadcasting, particularly for television, but I think it also applies to radio, it goes, say cat, see cat. So in television, if you're talking about a cat, you damn well better be showing a cat. So if Alan's on our podcast and he's talking about, if you listen to the isolated vocal track of David Bowie doing that song with Queen, it would blow your mind. Well, now I absolutely have to find it so we can play it. And so those sorts of things take
Under Pressure?
Yes, exactly. That particular track. So the idea being is that we put a ton of post-production work into the podcast because you're giving us your time. And your time is valuable. And so I think it's important that we improve the signal to noise ratio in podcasting, because as I say, either you've got 100 listeners and you're a 40-year-old virgin with a Logitech $49 headset living in your mother's basement doing D&D. You got 4,000 listeners like we do, or you have 1 million listeners like Joe Rogan. There doesn't seem to be very much in between. So if you're going to give us your time, we want to make sure that we give you a good product.
Are you actually a geek? Do you play like D&D or Magic the Gathering or Settlers?
I'm a geek. I'm not a nerd. And there's a substantial difference. I actually had this conversation with my wife recently because she kept calling me nerd, and I was really offended. A nerd is someone who does not have a life. Back when I was in my late teens, early 20s, the way I would explain it was geeks still got girls. Nerds.
Okay.
Now that doesn't really apply to me now that I've been married for 17 years now. But the point being is that I never did Magic the Gathering or Dungeons and Dragons, but a geek is obsessive about their hobby. They just happen to have a life outside of their hobby. So all of the stuff that you and I would deal with here, just making this possible. I'm really interested in the technology that goes into it, which is why Futurhythmic is one of the reasons why Futurhythmic is as successful as it is. The primary reason is all the other people other than me behind it. But by and large, it's an insane curiosity about how the world works. I was the kid who took his toys apart with a screwdriver.
I was a kid who played Magic the Gathering and Civilization and Settlers of Catan and ran my own season and kept my own stats and had them in our own base. Nerd. Yeah, I am. But I was also cool. Okay, Michael? I had
Okay,
friends and
sure.
stuff.
You say
And I
so.
played sports too. I'm also 3-time Settlers of Catan Canadian champion.
Really?
And I was also a junior chess champ back in the day. But I digress.
I tried chess, and I learned I can play chess, but chess, Scrabble, any game that proves I'm not as smart as I think I am, I don't want to have anything to do with.
Now, let's talk about this pandemic here, and then I'll get back to future. But I'll talk about the pandemic, that we're in the midst of it. What do you see the future of this pandemic? And I know you're not an infectious disease specialist, but what
Right.
do you see? And have you made changes in your life and obviously in your life, but in your business?
Well, actually, the bottom fell out of my business model when COVID-19 hit, because not my business model, my business development model fell uh, as a result of COVID-19 because it relied on me calling up people like you and saying, "Could I buy you a coffee? Find out what's going on in your world?" Because, as I say, I would get to talk to you for 7 minutes at a time. And that's really not enough time at all. So, what I had been doing over the course of the last 2 years was calling up all of those really interesting people that I spoke to and said, "Can I buy you a coffee and just pick your brain, find out what's going on in your world?" And the intent wasn't to land a client, the intent was to educate myself about the world around me. But invariably, by the end of the conversation, where I would find out what was going on in their world, they would find out what was going on in mine, I would offer insight and suggestions as to how they might be able to overcome whatever objection or hurdle or issue that they were having that they just happened to mention. And when you offer free advice, people have a habit of coming back to you for paid advice. But when COVID-19 hit, the idea of asking somebody to go out and spend a half an hour of their day chatting with me at a fancy restaurant or a downtown hotel lobby bar, that went all out the window. But on the flip side of that, because I'd spent the last 2 years building up a client base, my existing clients recognize the limitations of COVID-19. The fortunate thing is, for example, with CIBC, we've got season 1 already in the can, and now we're producing it and putting it out there. But by and large, I'm pivoting most of my clients to podcasting because we've seen a 15% decline in listener minutes in the podcasting world for podcasts that do not have something to do with COVID-19.
Wow.
We've seen a remarkable jump in podcasts that tackle that issue. Now, I think there's going to be some COVID-19 fatigue that kicks in eventually, and we're going to go back to our spit and chicklets type, podcasts and things like that. But pivoting my clients to podcasting when they were unable to go directly to their clients face to face gave them the ability to put out content that was polished, that was informed, and had a message that they could then, by and large, broadcast. So instead of having to pick up the phone and call 1,000 clients, they can send to 1,000 clients this podcast link.
Yeah, it's exactly kind of what we're doing, right?
Exactly.
Have a story, have a conversation, and then you can post it and people could see it again. Hey, I want to ask you about the role that obviously you're a big technology buff. What do you think the role of technology plays in the future of minimizing the impact of future pandemics?
Well, that really depends on where you are in the world. William Gibson, the science fiction author, has a great quote. He says, "The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed." And not only is the future not evenly distributed, but the future has gone dystopian in some parts of the planet and less so in other parts of the planet. And what I'm getting at is China. For example, China took the cell phone technologies that we have today and they used them to track people who were inflicted with COVID-19. And that helped them shut down cities. It helped them shut down individuals. It helped contain the virus. Now, I think there's an argument to be made that they didn't do enough early enough. But because they have the society they have, they weren't worried about privacy implications of tapping into everybody's phone and all of that. And we talked about this on Futurrhythmic, as a matter of fact, with Sandy Pentland at MIT, that you can use anonymized cell phone data to track pandemics. So in The rest of the world, where we recognize the importance and the value of individuality and privacy, we still have the ability to take what is by and large the most important piece of plastic and metal that we've got in our lives and help us contain future pandemics. So I'm really optimistic that we're going to be able to, at some point down the road, leverage all of our smartphones in a manner that not only helps society, but also retains our independence and our privacy along the way. The question becomes, how patient are we going to be to get to that point? Because if we're not patient about it, we're going to push it through, we're going to rush it, we're going to claim emergency powers, we're going to make demands of our people, and we're going to run roughshod over privacy rights. And then once COVID-19 is behind us, we're all going to kind of forget about it and not really realize that we gave up liberty in pursuit of security. And as Ben Franklin said, those who do that deserve neither.
Do you think that the fears, there's a lot of fears. So I've seen the studies, I've seen a few websites, articles where, they're tracking our movement with respect to COVID, how many people are staying home, how many people aren't. And I kind of knew that we were tracking this, but it was kind of jarring to see it. 37% of people didn't stay home last weekend. I forget where I saw it, but it was done through algorithms on anonymous cell phone data.
Right.
Are the fears justified for that? Does the end,
does the end
do we need? Yeah, does the end justify the means for that?
I don't think so. I think that, people have asked me in the past, and I've flat out said privacy is dead. We don't live in a world where we really have privacy anymore. A prime example of that was my favorite antivirus software, Avast. Excellent. Better than anything I got out of Norton or McAfee. Those things. It's stereotypical that antivirus software grinds your computer to a halt, but Avast never did that. And then we find out that while Avast had been claiming through its firewall protections and all those other types of features that come with antivirus and anti-malware software, that they were protecting you, at the same time, they were monitoring every single thing you did on a screen, and they were tracking it, and they were selling it. Now, I don't know how you feel about that, but I thought the antivirus software company I bought was there for me. Because as you know, with Facebook, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Well, now I can't trust the only antivirus company that I've used for the past 5 years. Where do I go from there? So privacy, by and large, is dead. No two ways about that. But we can sort of push back against it. And again, on Futurismic, I went down to Burbank, California, and spoke to science fiction author Cory Doctorow about how science fiction informs the future. And it was really unfortunate because usually what we do when we do these types of things is we do a pre-interview, we find out, get a sense as to what the guest really is thinking about stuff, so we can then craft a story around where their head is at. And I never got a chance to do that with this guy because he was way too busy. We get down there and I'm like, so science fiction informs the future. And he's like, no, I don't think it does. I'm like, oh, crap. What are we going to talk about all day if you don't think science fiction tells us what the future is like? And his point was that science fiction tells us what the future could be, but it gives us the opportunity to push back against that future. And we have to do that, regardless as to whether you think privacy is dead. If we just accept it, well, all is lost.
What's your favorite on the science fiction? What's your favorite science fiction book or movie, or both?
Well, at this point, I suppose 1984 or Fahrenheit 451 would probably be good examples of that. One of my favorite things in Fahrenheit 451, which for those unfamiliar with the book, 451 degrees Fahrenheit is the temperature at which paper burns, and the book is about the book is about book burning, and it follows a central character who's a firefighter. But in the future, firefighters don't put out fires; they start fires because their job is to burn books. And a little side twist to that whole issue of privacy and the right to free will and information is the character's wife is slowly going crazy. She's got and I can't remember when the book was originally written, but it was long before the age of television. And it was described as she spent all day watching the walls because the walls were full width television screens. And the people in the soap opera she was watching were life size because of the size of the screen against the wall. And she started to see them as real people. And she started to lose her mind and interact with that. And I think society is kind of doing that as well with social media.
1953.
There you go. So
1953 by Ray Bradbury.
Yeah, early days of television, back when television screens were this big. The idea, like my television is 48 inches, I think. And, that's considered small by today's standards, particularly for geeks. Like here I am doing the penis measuring contest with my friends, and they've all got 50-inch TV. Like, oh, clearly.
I have a huge TV, Michael. I have a huge TV.
Well, I don't know what having a huge TV tells me about you, but
a case for a huge TV. Anyways, hey, let me ask you about you also host another podcast, right? With the CD Howe Institute.
Yep.
What drives you there? What motivates you? What excites you about that?
Oh, the C.D. Howe Institute is a remarkable organization. As a think tank that is a charity-based think tank, it is interested in public policy issues of the day, and it has been all over the federal government's response to COVID-19, shining light into the dark corners where necessary, and it's an honor to work with these people, these incredibly smart people. I was very pleased that I had an opportunity, back full circle to what we were talking about earlier about being able to spend all day with someone, being able to spend 30 minutes in a conversation with a really smart person about any given public policy topic of the day allows me to keep my hand in the type of day-to-day stuff that I got at BNN. One of the things that I missed about leaving the Business News Network was access to some of the brightest brains on Bay Street. And so to be able to host the C.D. Howe Institute podcast, speak to not only the fellows and those who work within the think tank, but also those who are within their orbit, has been a tremendous education on present day and the future in a way that I would never have gotten had I walked away from BNN and just stuck with the Geeks and Beats podcast. I think I've got 4 podcasts running now.
Nice. Busy man. A reminder, viewers, we're here with Michael Hainsworth. Thursday, our guest on this show is professional golfer and top 15 ranked golfer in the world, Mark Leishman, 12-time professional tour winner, 5-time winner on the PGA Tour. He won in 2020. Really excited about Thursday, 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern. Michael, I want to ask you about your one kind of, if you could interview anyone right now, either in the Futurist, who would be your ideal guest for the Futuristic episode and or for Geeks and Beats?
I would have to say at this point, with everything that's going on in the world, Bill Gates. And not to talk to Bill Gates about technology, although we would definitely talk about technology. He has been at the forefront of pandemic research with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for years. He warned us in 2005, I believe it was, that this was the kind of thing that was going to happen. He worked extensively with the Obama administration to prepare for the inevitability of a pandemic. And it would be really interesting to talk to him, not just about COVID-19 explicitly, but because he's done such extensive work in Africa and in parts of the world where, again, the future has not yet arrived, that he might provide us with some really interesting insight into the human condition, but also what it's going to take to elevate humanity beyond where it is today, beyond the noise that comes with the Donald Trump era of fake news. It'd be really interesting to talk to him.
Yeah, I got a ton of respect for that guy. I would love to interview him too. Tell you what, we'll get him together.
When I was younger, I hated Microsoft. I was a Mac guy. Microsoft, they're the evil empire. And look at all the money that guy's making. Jesus Christ. And then what does he do? He turns around, pulls a full Rockefeller, and starts donating the vast majority of his fortune to making the world a better place. So it gave me a real pendulum swing on him specifically and the work that he's accomplished over the last 20 years since leaving Microsoft on a day-to-day basis.
I would argue that he's the one that really started this whole billionaire giving their money away, this 2.0 wave of billionaires giving their money away. He's now challenging other billionaires to give their money away. He's kind of led to probably a lot of billions of dollars given away with the same contest that you were talking about earlier. Who can donate the most of their wealth?
Well, let's bring it full circle back to Jeff freaking Bezos. Come on, pal, cough it up. If you're one of the richest men on the planet, you really need to be doing a hell of a lot more because we made you the richest man on the planet. And if we're all dead from COVID-19, we're not going to be buying your USB sticks delivered to us on a carbon footprint that's enough to choke the planet.
Tell us how you really feel, though.
Yeah. See, this is one of the beauties about my new life is I never hit publish on a tweet without asking, what does Wendy fucking Freeman think of this tweet? And once I eventually left and I didn't have to care what somebody else thought, like, of course, I'm not going to go out and just, I'm going to lose all my clients. I also don't have the type of personality anyway. That's not where my head is at. But to not have to look over my shoulder, to not have to walk into the office or the newsroom the next morning and worry about being called into the boss's office for something I tweeted the night before, it is incredibly relieving to be able to be my own man.
You are the man, Michael. Absolutely. Hey, I want to ask you about the biggest change that you think is coming to the future on the algo side or on the algorithm side, the biggest change that you think that no one's talking about yet, or something that you think that it's obvious to you that you're not seeing right now.
When you say algorithmic, do you mean as in the world of machine learning and artificial intelligence, or are you talking about trading?
The entire wide scope of machine learning, AI, anything kind of remotely, are we going to be, we're going to be walking down streets and, what do you think is coming that we haven't thought of?
Are you watching
that viewers here aren't thinking of? Sorry?
Are you watching Westworld by any chance?
I don't watch much TV, but no, I missed that one.
So without any spoilers, season 3 of Westworld, seasons 1 and 2 were all about a theme park that was created with android-like humans for the enjoyment of the theme park goers. And it was, debauchery central. Season 3 is after the robots have gotten out into the real world. And in season 3, what we learn is that in the real world, there's this spherical-like computer system that is an artificial intelligence technology that is not only predicting the outcome of everybody's lives, but also controlling it. And while that's a flight of fancy in 2020, it's not a flight of fancy in 2040, in 2060. And when I was at MIT and I was talking to Sandy Pentland about artificial intelligence and machine learning, I got to the very end of the day and I said, listen, I have to ask you this question. I was really reluctant to ask it at the beginning of our conversation because I didn't want you to storm out of the room and never come back. But if I don't ask it, people are going to say, how come you didn't ask? Is the Terminator and Skynet really going to happen? And the godfather of artificial intelligence told me yes. How disconcerting is that? And then he says, but it's something we don't have to worry about for 200 years. So when it comes to artificial intelligence, we don't have artificial intelligence today. We have machine learning. And we are in the infancy of this technology. We're actually in the third wave of this technology. You may recall back in the late 1940s, early 1950s, when the transistor had become a thing. We saw at World's Fairs all of these robots doing this sort of thing, and you knew it was a guy with a microphone behind the scenes. But we believed back in the 50s that computers were going to have sentience to them, like Star Trek. And that didn't happen because we didn't have the computing power. We forgot about it by and large. And then the 80s came along and the integrated circuit became so ubiquitous and so cheap that suddenly we had data centers and a certain amount of computing power. And we had that second wave of artificial intelligence where we thought, oh, well, maybe now we can actually make these computers do this thing. And that, of course, didn't happen because they simply weren't powerful enough. And we didn't have what we now understand is critical to artificial intelligence, something called big data. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, big data started to become a thing. And now we're actually building out hardware that takes advantage of this. The reason why I had to spend $1,500 goddamn dollars on an NVIDIA graphics card for my virtual reality computer is because AI scientists are snapping up all the GPUs so that they can use them for machine learning. But we're not at the artificial intelligence stage yet. We're still at the stage where we're learning how this technology is going to evolve. And I think over the course of the next 10 years, we're really going to see some remarkable advances that get us closer and closer to that Westworld orb where all of our decisions are by and large made for us.
I want to, so my favorite machine learning documentary is, this will show my nerd side, is AlphaGo. It's a documentary about the machine learning and Go. Go is apparently the one game that they thought computers would never be able to beat humans.
Right.
So obviously we know that Deep Blue beat Gary Kasparov back in the 90s, and that was a chess guy back then. And computers beat us at chess. Computers were never supposed to beat us at Go, and they did. Anyways, I think it's a fantastic movie on machine learning, and I would take a look at it. I want to finish up here on the markets real quick. I know you're not in it every day anymore, but so we saw the Dow go from 30 to 18, right? Now we're back at 23 and a half, call it.
Yep.
Do you think, I mean, I'm not asking you to make a prediction, but do you think, I kind of am asking you to make a prediction, I guess. What do you see kind of happening? Do you think we'll be kind of bumping back down, or do you think we'll be kind of seeing a situation where the market recovers, rallies, and gets back to its highs?
Right. Yeah, I'll absolutely make a prediction. First of all, if you're making any investment decisions based upon my opinion, then you got a lot more trouble than anything else. But having said that, I think we've got another leg down. I'm really concerned, not only about the prospects of a second wave of COVID-19, but that the Americans haven't even peaked yet. And while areas like New York State are saying that they haven't seen the same increase in deaths or positives that they had in the past, we still have the entirety of Middle America to contend with. And those are very Trump-oriented people. And Trump literally spent the last 3 months telling everybody this wasn't a problem. So my bigger concern is that we're going to get that second wave. We're going to get a Trumpster second wave of people who followed his advice and saw him up on a dais with 12 people crammed cheek to jowl beside him, whereas our prime minister is standing solo in front of the front door of his house. And in the European Union, they're separated by like 12 feet kind of thing when they have conferences. I'm worried we're going to see another leg down because we're going to get another wave of really bad news. So I don't think the worst is behind us.
Yeah, I think it's going to be earnings driven probably when the announcements come and there's like no earnings or like dramatic losses for everyone.
Yeah.
Tell me about the charity work that you're doing. Are you doing any charity work these days?
I'm not doing any charity work at the moment. When it comes to charity type stuff, my wife is the one who handles the donations side of things that end up in my taxes. But I'm a little weird in this respect, and actually ties right back into being a geek. I'm the guy who makes obscenely large anonymous donations to veterans standing outside the grocery store. When I was in my mid-20s, there was a video game, I believe it was Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, and it took place, this particular one took place on D-Day, and you were on a transport in the water.
I remember that game.
Other guys, and the flap comes down, and the bullets start whizzing past your head, And as a video game player, it's your job to not only get to the beach, but then get up to the top of the beach and, overcome the Germans. And it sounds really dorky and it sounds really trite, but that was my first true understanding of the horror that these young men went through. And some of them came back and ended up standing outside grocery stores asking for your donation. And I can't possibly imagine a more horrific thing than to ask someone to go to war. And as a result, I'm that guy who makes those weird, outrageously lavish donations to the poor 98-year-old guy standing outside trying to sell me a poppy.
Good for you, Michael. I remember the time when my dad and I went to Verdun in France, and there was like a town that used to be there, just got wiped out, and it was row upon row as far as we could see of these white crosses. And I remember just standing there with my dad and watching these crosses, and I was just like the weight on my shoulders, and I never ever forget that. And good for you for helping out those people. Yeah, I did
experiences in my life emotionally. One, the birth of my daughter, top of the list. Second, spending the day at the Kennedy Space Center.
Cool, so cool.
I am a huge space nerd, and I firmly believe that walking on the moon was man's highest achievement.
Did it happen though?
Come on, Rob.
It's a joke.
The third one is I expect to have that when I go to Verdun as well, and I experience that which you had experienced. I want to make sure that my daughter sees that. I think it's absolutely critical that children who don't have relatives who went through the Second World War understand what they went through. My daughter's grandfather was German, and he was 8 during the Second World War. He watched as Jews were marched past his house, and when they stumbled, they were shot dead on the spot. At 8, he had to suffer through that sort of experience. And it's important that we make sure that future generations understand the horror that we put ourselves through.
That's heavy.
Yeah, sorry. Hey, waka.
Funniest moment you've ever had on set or recording or anything, the funniest thing that's ever happened to you in your career in broadcasting?
I don't have a specific one, but when I worked on air, my colleagues considered me a rock. That I was like, you couldn't make me laugh. You couldn't crack me up while I was on air. And I'll tell you, we did a lot of that. We like when for example, Kim Parley and I used to work together at BNN. She's now at TD Bank, and she would work across from me. And she was one of these people who used her hands. Now, when I do media training and I explain to people about hand gestures, that hand gestures have to have a purpose. And if you just have hand gestures all the time, there's no value to those hand gestures. And Kim had this thing where she was using her hands all the time. And so kind of the asshole move on my part is I pretended I was a cat. And every time she moved her hands, I would pretend it was a laser pointer, and I would just follow her hands. And that was
that is a dick move.
Yeah. Way of trying to get her to stop doing that. But one day she busted out on air because of it. But I think if there was a version where the tables were turned on me, it was one day while I was reading the teleprompter, my floor director, of which they don't have floor directors anymore because we pink slipped all those people. He lifted his shirt up right next to the camera and started playing with his nipple in an attempt to get me to laugh. Like a rock. Couldn't do it. But I think that's the closest I've ever gotten.
Nobody's ever messed with the old teleprompter on you. I'm Ron Burgundy? ?
No, actually, I would routinely tell the control room person responsible for rolling the teleprompter that I am your worst enemy. You're going to hate me. You're going to go home every night, and you're going to wish that you never worked at the Business News Network as a teleprompter roller for TV's Michael Hainsworth. And the reason is I ad-lib around the teleprompter. And so the problem with that is that the poor person on the other end who's turning a knob doesn't know when to start turning it again because they don't know when I'm going to pick up and keep going.
Didn't you have the knob like next to you on the set?
Well, yes, sometimes you do. Sometimes you have control over your own teleprompter when you're seated at the anchor desk. But you may recall in my final days at BNN, I was the walk and talk guy. I was the guy.
Right. You walked a ton.
Oh yeah, like you should see my Fitbit stats. And so as a result, you needed somebody else who was able to roll that teleprompter. And I must have cut years off the lives of the poor interns who were responsible for trying to keep up with me.
And now you are out of the official BNN broadcast biz. You're running your own, you're editor at large for Futurithmic, Nokia product. You are a producer, host of CIBC Innovation Economics. You're the host and producer of the Howe Institute Podcast. And you also run the Geeks and Beats podcast. Michael Hainsworth, it was a pleasure for you to join us today. I'm incredibly thankful to have got this time with you. Hopefully I'll be able to book you again. We'll talk more about technology. I want to remind our guests, Thursday this week, 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern, Mark Leishman is going to be on the show. Please take a second and subscribe or like our Facebook page. Subscribe to our, I'm doing the hand thing. I'm doing exactly what you told me not to do.
That's the
take a second to subscribe. Okay. So subscribe, like, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Mike, it's been a great time. We'll see you in Toronto at some point or again on my show.
Stay healthy.
You too.